Evening. Today was a historical day. I listened to the speaker. It was a historical day because today is the day that we close the book on this investigation. It is time that America turns the page. It is time for America to move forward. The Democrats have to stop wasting time in trying to have a do-over of the 2016 presidential election. For more than 2 years, Democrats have obsessed about the Mueller investigation, going as far as falsely accusing that they had evidence of collusion, which we found that to be true today. We heard today only helped to reinforce the facts that there is no collusion and there is no obstruction. It is well past the time to put this country first. The Democrats are more focused on bringing down the president than they are of building up America. We've gone to roughly 200 days of this new Democrat socialist majority. Name me one thing that they have solved. We have a challenge on our border. We have a trade agreement that could build more jobs, make America stronger and more prosperous, but they will not bring it up. We have a challenge in our health care when it comes to surprise billing to thousands of Americans. Again, they've only focused on the Mueller investigation. Today is the end of that chapter. Today is to put politics aside and put people first, put this country first. Now I'd like to call up our Republican leader of the Judiciary Committee, Doug Collins.
Thank you, everyone. I think what was interesting today, and it was just said a few minutes ago, is there was a painting a picture. The Democrats said they want to paint a picture. Well, why don't we start with today? Let's paint the picture of today. What did we find out? Mr. Mueller came here today, and actually, for anybody who wants to separate collusion and conspiracy, we put that to rest today. That's a synonymous term, and even in his report, he said so. So for all the accusations out there that said there's collusion in plain sight, there's all this out there, we put that to rest today. We're painting a picture. When they tried to paint a picture today by putting up slides today and talking about obstruction and going through these different acts and even putting green check marks beside it, and then at the end, when asked about it, Mr. Mueller says, I disagree with your theory or your interpretation. When we go through this, what we are seeing is, and in my committee, it's really interesting today because it was agreement on the one thing that there was Russian and foreign interference in our 2016 election. But what has been the answer from my committee, my majority, and my chairman? To bring no bills forward, to bring no solutions forward. In fact, all we want to do is paint a picture of a president that they despise. They've done so since 2016, and for 7.5 months, that's 7 months, that's all we've done in our committee. Someone asked me yesterday, how did you prepare for the Mueller hearing? Didn't have to worry about it because that's all my committee talks about. For 7 months, all we talk about. And everything we've come up with is show hearings, dog and pony shows, running out old people from Watergate era. And what have we found? That the American people are footing the bill for a continuation of 2016 election that they don't like. So the question I have is, if we're going to paint a picture, then let's paint the picture of what's actually happening. You have a Democratic majority who has no agenda, who has a Democratic majority who has trouble bringing bills to the floor, who has a Democratic majority in our own committee where the very things that they talk about, immigration, election interference, and others, could be dealt with, but they don't bring any bills forward. In fact, even tomorrow, we're going to have another hearing to talk about the problem on the border instead of fixing the problem on the border. I challenge the Democratic colleagues, get over the election of 2016. Run in 2020 if you want. This president has put forward a great economy. This president's put forward great ideas. Run on those. Quit trying to dredge up a picture that today got painted that said your investigation is over. Mr. Mueller has done his job. He presented a report. Someone asked, did you find out anything new? The answer is no. We've had the report for 3 months, and Mr. Mueller simply said what was in the report, that collusion and conspiracy were over, and the observations of obstruction by the Democratic majority, he didn't subscribe to their theory. Neither do the American people. That's why we're fighting for real solutions instead of the continuation of the show. That's the picture that was painted today. With that, I yield to Mr. Nunes.
Thank you. I think what you see today is collusion between the Republican Party and the Trump campaign is over. There was no evidence. There was a dossier that was built and paid for by the Clinton campaign. That was the real collusion. You had collusion through a British former MI6 agent who was working supposedly with Russian sources. We didn't get any new information on that today, but the Democrats have refused to accept reality They live in an alternative universe. So I think, as Representative Collins said, and like we said today, this is over. And hopefully this will be the end of these hearings, because the House Intelligence Committee has important work to do. If you look at the national security for this country, there is nothing more important right now than passing the United States, Mexico, and Canadian agreement that's ready to go. If you look at the situation on our border, that has to be dealt with. We need real legislation to start to move through this House so it can get to the Senate. It's what the Democrats ran on. They promised solutions to immigration, and they're not delivering it. So, two pressing issues not being dealt with. Hopefully, after today, we will begin, when we get back here in September, to work on immigration reform and to pass this very important trade agreement. I'll introduce Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. The leader and my colleagues are exactly right. It's time to move on. Understand where we're at. 3 years ago next week is when the Trump-Russia investigation began. And the FBI investigated for 10 months. Understand the big picture. The president's falsely accused. FBI investigates it for 10 months. They find nothing. We know that because we deposed Jim Comey and he told us that. And then Bob Mueller takes over in May of 2017 and he investigates it for 22 months. So here we are now 3 years later, and Bob Mueller found no collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination. It is definitely time to move on. The second thing I would say is the investigation that matters, and I said this in today's hearing, well, actually the two investigations that matter most now. The one Mr. Horowitz is going to have completed here in a couple months, and of course, the one that the Attorney General has tasked John Durham, U.S. Attorney, to do, which is to look into how this whole 3-year saga began that our country has now lived through for these 3 years. So those are the things that matter, and I look forward to hearing from that. But let's stop the continuous investigation into something that's we've already spent 3 years on, and let's focus on those issues that really matter to the American people.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Today, the special counsel oftentimes answered questions with one words. Sometimes he didn't have total command of the details that appeared at times. Do you have confidence that he was fully capable of running this investigation, or what was your takeaway with his performance?
I think the takeaway for the Democrats who are trying to back channel that his performance wasn't good is they just didn't simply like the answers. I mean, it's a certain thing when you go through, and so for someone who ran a organization like he did, what was really interesting was he had 488 pages, millions of documents, the testimonies. He had a command. He had his advisors there. He answered the questions as we went through them. I think the bottom line is the Democrats didn't like how he answered them, so they're trying to find a way to salvage something. They're trying to find a way to say that what we did today actually mattered and that they haven't been wasting people's time or money. The picture that was painted today, though, was a long-time investigator who simply laid the facts out. They just don't like it.
He said that he's at the top of the hearing. The president was not totally exonerated. Do you accept that? He was not totally exonerated according to what Mueller said?
Well, I think if you watch the hearings today and you watch both the Intel and Judiciary Committee, we discussed this issue of exoneration and where that legal theory that he would even come out was a very novel theory because it's never been used before. It was not something for him to exonerate, which is also a flip side to say there was not enough there to find guilt. So instead of going from the opposite side, instead of exoneration, which he was not there to do, he's never done before and none have ever done before, there was also saying that he didn't have enough to go forward on. So as we move forward again, if I was the Democrats, and just as they just got through talking about it in their own press conference, I would be frustrated too, because they had promised and promised and promised that Mueller investigation was the gold standard. It would solve all their problems. The problem is they got to the end and it didn't tell them what they wanted to sell.
You had the chairman of the Intel Committee lie to the American public for the last 2 years, that he had proof, he had evidence. We found that that was not true. You had the investigations, you had the report. And today, you had the hearings. You have a chairman of Judiciary who ran for his chairmanship based upon that he proposed to his own conference that he would be the very best person for impeachment. This has been their goal, but none of the evidence has panned out. The only people who have been hurt in this are the American public. I watched the Democrats' press conference. I watched their body language. I watched what they spoke of. They know this is not what they wanted to see today. It was not the answers they wanted to hear. Even when they laid out this theory, Mueller said, no, I disagree. This should be the end of the chapter of this book that we put America through. It is time to solve the problems. I understand this majority has no agenda. I understand that they can't pass something outside of a resolution. But the American public expects more from this Congress. It would be the best advice for these Democrats to put the American public first and move forward to the issues that we can solve. Yes, sir.
Leader McCarthy, you were with the president today at the White House during, I think, the hearings. What was his mood, and was he watching the hearings, and what was his take on them?
The president was working on issues. We were working on issues today. I think he had caught in some of it. He was very upbeat. I've watched this president be upbeat almost every single day. You know, President Trump, his cup is always half full. To think what this poor president had to go through. If you sat for 3 years and hear somebody say a lie about you, and with each turn of the corner, it gets proven correct. I watched a question before Mueller, did anybody in the White House not come and testify to you? No. The number of papers before him. While you had people on the other side actually lie to the American public, ahead of the Intel Committee. That's the question that I have for the Speaker of the House. Knowing what she knows now, how can Adam Schiff still be chairman of a committee that we have to have trust in on the intel around the world when he lied to the American public?
Which issues were you
Yes.
on?
The special counsel raised concerns that this could be the new normal as far as interference goes. He raised concerns about the president openly asking for help from WikiLeaks. I'm curious, because you want to talk about legislation, would you guys support legislation that would tighten rules to make it clear that it's inappropriate, illegal for candidates to do that?
Well, really what's interesting is this new majority came in and said, oh, we're going to have hearings before we put bills on the floor. My committee is so paralyzed with their just obsession with this president and the fact that they believe he should be impeached that we don't have hearings anymore. We don't have discussions anymore. And we have bills. We've put forward a bill. Some of our other members have put forward bills. They can put forward bills, but we're not getting hearings in our committee. The very committee in which Mr. Mueller talked about today, about the very threat to our existence in our election, we're not putting bills together. That tells me either they're bankrupt of ideas or they don't want to have the hearings because they would rather run the narrative of running down this president in light of the 2020 election. All I say to the Democrats, if you truly believe, it talked about love for America. Well, that love for America would actually be doing legislation. So I think those are things that we could do that would actually do, and we would support if we could get them actually to have some discussion about it.
You would support making it crystal clear that the president should not have asked WikiLeaks for help?
I would just
That wasn't your question to me.
revert back to the House Republican report from last year. A year ago, we put out 45 recommendations. I would refer you to that report if you want to see things that could be done to guard our election system against fraud.
Well, let me go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, maybe tomorrow we should have a hearing on the very issue you're talking about, making sure our election system is safe as possible. But instead, in oversight, we're going to subpoena White House employees for all their emails. So the Democrats continue this, as the leader said, when you're so focused on stopping the president, it's actually tough to do what's best for the country. And in your specific example, tough to do what's best for our election system. So yeah, we would support moving ahead, having bipartisan focus on that. But the focus in oversight and judiciary seems to be totally on going after the president and folks who work for him.
The one thing I'll tell you as a Republican leader, I'll tell you the things we will work on. We'll work with anybody that wants to make sure that this border is secure, that we solve this crisis, that we take care of the kids. As a Republican leader, we'll work on making sure USMCA that makes America stronger, makes us in this battle around the rest of the world that our GDP actually grows, that more jobs are created here. We'll gladly work on that tomorrow. We'll work on when it comes to health care to make sure surprise billing, that the Americans across this country, they get a surprise bill even though they're in network, and it comes back to them. We'll work to solve that. The challenge that we have is the majority controls what's happening in committees, and none of that has happened. None of that has happened. The only thing that has happened this entire year is something to do to undercut this president. Well, now it's time to build up America and turn the page. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Leader, and honestly, this question is for all four of you. Do you have no concerns about how the president conducted himself based on the Mueller report?
No, it's very
concerns
conclusive. I do not. You're asking, do I have concerns about this president who's created millions of jobs, has had the strongest economy we have in more than 50 years?
The examples of obstruction, potential obstruction of justice from which Robert Mueller did not exonerate this president. Do you have any concerns
There was
at
no
all?
there was no collusion. So how do you get to obstruction? They watched the entire Investigation for 3 years, go after something where there's been no proof to it.
Did that with an investigator, we'd get thrown in jail.
I think in the questioning of John Radcliffe to Mueller answered your question rather clearly, that no, this president has not done anything wrong in the process. So no, I don't have a problem with this president.
No, I would just say this. What I have concerns about is the fact in 2016, 2 American citizens were spied on who were associated with the presidential campaign. We know that's the case. The Attorney General told us that's the case. We know that they went to the FISA court and got a warrant to spy on Carter Page, and they renewed it 3 times. They spied on him for the better part of a year, and they did the same thing with George Papadopoulos, except they didn't go to the court. They used human sources. So that, to me, is scary. Never forget what Emmett Flood wrote to the Attorney General when he said, if they can do this to a presidential campaign and to a president of the United States, imagine what they can do to you and I. If they're going to target and spy, imagine what they can. That's why the investigation Bill Barr is doing and the one Michael Horowitz is doing are so darn important. That's what concerns me, and that kind of stuff should never happen in this country. But we know it did, and the Attorney General of the United States says he doesn't think it was properly predicated. So let's figure out if it was or if it wasn't. Let's get an answer to that, and thank God that's exactly what he's doing.
You have no concerns about this president's
If you were falsely accused of something, you would be ticked off too. I mean, that's the problem here. And this whole thing is played out over 3 years. And remember what we learned today. They didn't even charge the guy who started the whole darn thing, this Joseph Mifsud. He's the first guy to tell Papadopoulos to rush. He lies to the FBI 3 times, doesn't charge him. They charged everyone else who gave him false statements. They charged 13 Russians no one's ever heard of. But, oh, you can't charge the guy who actually started this whole 3-year saga we've endured as a country? I don't get that. That's why, again, I will say it until it's done. The investigation that's happening right now at the Justice Department is so darn important.
Yep. I'll finish up it. I agree with what's been said here about the further investigation, but the question you're asking, I'll address in this. And it goes back to a certain part of the hearing. Also, remember today that you talk about, I asked a specific question, Mr. Mueller, were you curtailed, hindered, or stopped from your investigation at all? His answer, no. So it goes back to obstruction. Was his answer? No. We talk about the actions of the president. John Dean, which I thought was just a farcical hearing that we had at point, but John Dean made a very interesting point because one of the Democrats, I believe, was asking him about advice or if your boss gave you advice, would you follow it? And he said, you got to be very careful here about folks who are like this president who has been so frustrated, who's been attacked from day one, has been very frustrated with this, but nothing happened to this investigation. We seem to gloss over that. We seem to gloss over the fact that it never stopped and we never went. The question at the end of the day is what happened. The question is not for the ethereal hypotheticals that the Democrats are throwing out there. To hide a bad agenda, they simply want to attack this president. When Mr. Mueller said that. And we answered that today. And when you come to the point when they laid out every possibility they could for obstruction, and Mr. Mueller looked at him and said, one, that I don't agree with your theory, that should tell you a lot right there.
You watch the question of Hakeem Jeffries, where he laid that all out. Mueller was very clear. Look, the only new thing I learned today is that even when Doug Collins says he's going to speak slower, that he can't. So, last question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Nunes, you brought up Boris Johnson, who became the prime minister today and indicated that he might be in some way compromised. Can you explain what you mean by that and why you think that the prime minister of the...
Well, it goes back to the origins of this investigation. So one of the frustrating things that's not in the Mueller report is who Mifsud actually is. He's mentioned in the report, I think, 24 times. So the point that I was making is that Mifsud, we know, has close ties not only to our own FBI and State Department, Western intelligence agencies. He worked at campuses that appear to have some type of relationship with multiple Western governments. He taught NATO courses. He was actually right here, just about 100 feet away in the Capitol Visitor Center in 2017, participating in a program here in the U.S. Capitol. So, and then that picture that I showed with Boris Johnson was it was a recent photo, I think less than a year old. So the point that I'm trying to make, if we really need to know more about Mifsud, either Comey said he's a Russian agent, but in the report, they don't say that. And all I was expressing is we really need to know the answer. But today, Mr. Mueller stood by what's in his report, but that really doesn't bring finality or closure to who Mifsud is. We still have that outstanding question.
What does that
Thank you.
with regards to Mr. Johnson? Because he met with Mifsud. Can you
No,
explain that?
I was making the point that If this guy is continuing to hang out with NATO leaders, Boris Johnson, many others, we need to know who this guy really is, because if he's a Russian agent, we need to make sure our Western allies know about it.
This wasn't about Boris, this was about the individual. Look, very clear. It's time to put America first. It's time for the Democrats to close the chapter on this book that they have tried for 3 years. It's time to get over the 2016 election and let's solve the problems that the American public expects us to have. Thank you.